Noman green screen hangar on the Noman School of Visual Effects grounds in Hollywood, California. I'm sitting with Dominic Qwek here. How you doing?
I'm great.
Good to see you.
Good to be here.
So we've been chatting sneakers and running shoes. Apparently we've got something in common. We're fans of keeping shoes far too long and past their due.
He knows so much about shoes, it's not even funny. I swear to God.
But yeah, we were discussing an old pair of Lacoste shoes that I have. And so what I was saying was, this particular pair of shoes I have, I could never find another pair. I've had my wife scouring the internet looking for them. They're red, white, and blue. If anybody knows where you can find this pair of shoes, it'd be sort of very nice to share with me. It's a red, white, and blue Lacoste. It's three color.
You want to give out your email?
Yeah, three color. They have my email. Everybody has my email. So you're here in day two, fresh off the foothills of starting day two. How do you feel about the electricity and the energy inside of the compound today?
It's great, man. Some really great questions. I love that you guys are doing this. I think it's just electrifying. You know, it brings the community together. That's a great thing, and I felt some of that in the audience. So.
Yeah. And were you nervous at all? There was a couple of heavy hitters in the audience that were watching along. Some friends and associated artists. We were nervous at all. Some friends of ours in the audience. You just feel like, hey, this is great. They're here to see it too.
Honestly, I wasn't nervous at all. It's more of like a sharing.
Yeah,
you know?
cool.
So it feels like I'm sculpting at home, but guess what? I have like 500 friends with me watching. And
you were pretty natural. I'd like to say that for those watching at home and not sort of feeling the presence. Dominic, he's in charge. I mean, it was really something to see you up there. It's good to see you again. But you've cut the hair.
I know, right?
I noticed that. Did anyone else notice that Dominic came?
I used to have like really long hair.
Yeah, we were like hair brothers. You know, we've come fully equipped. I've trimmed a bit of my beard as well.
I think it just happened one day when I realized, you know, the weather is too hot.
Right, in California.
Yeah, right.
I want to talk about something you mentioned out there. We were getting into the sort of meat and potatoes of sculpting and things, but we didn't touch too much on the time spent in the business overseas. What can you describe your experience working overseas? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay. I would say, and I don't mean to offend anybody, there's a very different work ethic in European companies.
Right.
There's a habit of taking things easier.
Okay.
You know, just
that's what I was going to get at.
Yeah, making sure you have a life after work, making sure you don't spend too much time at work. But it's a very different mentality, you know, and there's pros and cons to working in Europe and working in the US. But it was a good experience, man. I worked in Amsterdam for 2 years at Guerrilla Games. It was a great company. The city is amazing. Amsterdam, oh my God, that city is just one of the best cities in the world, right? Yeah, but overall, I really enjoyed it. It was a good experience.
That's cool, because that's what I thought. That was my next question, was how you managed the cultural differences. And I think that anyone who spent any time significantly in Europe knows that there's a very different, not work, I wouldn't call it a work ethic. I think it's culturally a very different perspective on time.
Oh, exactly.
Right? It's the perspective of time is very different. We appreciate it, by the way, is what we're saying.
No,
I like it as well.
I sort of miss something about that.
Yeah.
In the US, it's all about meeting your deadlines, and that's a good way of looking at it.
Which is good.
Yeah.
And there's variations on that as well. I find working in California very different than working on the East Coast, because there's this sort of maybe more laissez-faire, relaxed attitude. We'll get it done, okay, you know. But you know, on the East Coast, it's like, hey, I need that yesterday, like in a New York minute, you know.
Crazy.
But I think so, because for the most part, you know, living and working in Europe is very different than visiting Europe. How do you handle like the middle of the afternoon kind of breaks that they take and things like that? Was that something that you take an opportunity to go do some art in the park or something?
No, are you kidding, man? When I was in Europe, when everybody takes a break, you take a break. Every Friday we had beers at work, you know, and
so you had a good time, basically.
It was amazing.
How long were you there? You were there a few years?
2 years.
2 years,
yeah.
Okay, sweet deal. Now, I want to touch on, Amsterdam is very rich culturally speaking as a place. What effect did that living experience have on your art and on you as an artist, being around that, because it has such a long storied history as being a place of great artistic merit. How did that affect you?
I think it had a deep effect on, it would have a deep effect on any artist, because, you know, you can only be inspired so much by books and other art, but when you actually live a different lifestyle, it affects you differently emotionally, right?
Food you eat.
Exactly. Food
the air you breathe.
People you talk to.
Right. Things you see.
Take in.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When you're walking, perhaps.
Dude, all of that affects you as an artist. And I would recommend artists to, like, you know, once a year, save some money, go out, travel, see the world.
Like a retreat.
Exactly. And it's a good way to recharge. You know, you have new sights that you're taking in. It's hard to explain it.
It takes snapshots, maybe. You know, you're looking at things in a different way because you're there. You know, you're maybe there on borrowed time. You're like, oh, I'm only here for 30 days or 15 days, whatever. And you might see somebody sitting or standing with an umbrella perhaps.
And that gives you an idea.
And you might be like, oh, you know, and you take this like this thumbnail in your mind, and then, because that's how I think of it sometimes. I'm away, I'm like, or I'll go home for a minute to the East Coast to Toronto, and I'll see something on the corner of like, you know, Queen Street, and I'll be like, maybe it's a homeless person or whatever, or somebody walking with a purse, and you say, oh, how different that is to see so many people on a sidewalk.
Right,
This is the car culture as well.
And the thing about that is like after your trip, you look at everything differently, you know, and it's a good feeling.
I think you change too.
Yeah, you have a fresh set of eyes. You know, you have a different outlook for a while, and then it's just a good way to recharge, replenish, and refocus.
Cool.
Your journey as an artist.
So I think that you can say that's had a positive effect on you. You talked about some early inspirations. Tell us a little more about what inspires you, and you know, who inspires you these days, from yesterday or today, historically speaking, or contemporaries of ours.
When I was growing up, cartoons definitely had a huge impact on me.
Okay. What are your favorite cartoons?
Well, they weren't really cartoons. They were like Ultraman.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's live action, man. You know, there's a guy in a suit, like, it's crazy.
You stay tuned. We've got a special friend coming up next later on, who's got a big deal to do with that over many years. You'll see who I'm talking about later. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but Ultraman, Godzilla, even some of the Western stuff like Alien, Predator, those stuff had a huge influence on me. I remember watching Alien for the first time and just not being able to read the detail. We just see the silhouette.
Right.
And it was such great cinematography, right?
Yeah.
Just simple things like that, you know, it sort of entices you without giving you too much.
Yeah. There's like that, a respect for you as a viewer that is not hitting you over the head with it. It's kind of subtle. I think there's subtlety in your work that way as well.
I try to do that as well. But when you're doing a design, you actually want to show as much as possible. Right. It's a production design, right? But yeah, going back to what inspires me, definitely Alien, Predator, and then some of the other artists, Simon Lee, Steve Wang, Alan Williams,
cool deal.
Takayuki Takeya, Nirasawa, both an equal mix of Western and Asian influences, I would say.
So you have a fusion going on in your mind of this, like,
because I grew up in Singapore and basically you're made to learn two languages growing up.
Right.
So you have to learn English and your mother tongue.
Right.
For me, that's Mandarin.
Mandarin.
Right?
I was going to say
so
that.
The same thing happens with the media. You've got an equal influx of both Western and Asian media, which is great. So I grew up having watched Ultraman, Godzilla, you know, and then I do like Teenage Mutant
Ninja Turtles.
You know, stuff like that.
That's a cool deal. Actually, you called to mind this old friend. There was a neighbor of my grandmother where I used to hang out when I was a kid. They had a 3-foot-tall Godzilla that was remote controlled.
Wow.
And I thought, that'll forever stay with me. I thought, whoa, man, Godzilla, but remote control. You know, the eyes would light up and the mouth would go, and it would walk around.
Right?
You know,
I need to get one of those.
Yeah, I can't even. I tried to look for one the other day on eBay and stuff, and I was like, man, I can't find that anywhere. What do you type in? You know, remote control Godzilla.
I'm sure you could get something.
I'll look even harder. I might. You know what? Look for an email from me coming up. That's funny. Do you ever experience working at a place like Blizzard, let's say? Do you ever experience any sort of external pressure when there's a new cinematic coming up? Do you feel like, oh man, I have this responsibility to the public for this to be so great because they expect this to be so great? And how do you deal with that, professionally speaking?
I think that pressure is put upon by ourselves.
Right.
You know?
Like an internalized thing.
The fans are great because they follow us for so many years. You know, they love what we do. But within cinematics, we have a very high standard. And with each cinematic, I think everyone is like, you know what, we got to outdo the last one. We got to outdo the last one. So that I wouldn't say we are experiencing pressure from outside. It's more like pressure from ourselves,
from within,
because we want to better ourselves. You know, so every time we are working on a new one, it's like, okay, how can we make this 10 times better than the last one?
Right. That's interesting to note, because I think that we have a similar sort of culture. We're always trying to, you know, you saw some of the newest stuff that was featured last night. We're always trying to push the envelope, you know? Man. So it can be, you know.
I was at home watching and my jaw just dropped.
I appreciate you saying that. That's cool. So I'm glad you liked it.
I love it.
Because we're really pushing, you know, all the time for you know, going to the limit of what we can, you know, what we can achieve. So that's, I think, really inspiring to hear that from you as well. One other thing was, what inspired things like the Rakshasa demon and the Gilman? Because I think those, to be honest with you, between you and I, those are two of my favorites.
Awesome,
With the
awesome.
Rakshasa being, you know, for me personally, that one touches on a sort of place in my mind that I'm very much a fan of. I'll show you something later on that I did recently. So where did you draw inspiration for that? You took that to the 9th degree of creepy, you know?
Yeah. I've looked at several designs in the past and looking at the vampires in Underworld.
Right.
And this is a conscious approach when I'm designing creatures is I look at what's out there and I learn from it. You know, I respect it. But at the same time, I'm trying to tell myself, try to do something different, you know. But it's still along the same vein, right? The vampires in Underworld, they have a split jaw thing, right? And then instead of doing that, I decided to extend the jaws below, all the way down to the chest, and have the design being focused from the mouth downwards, right? So a lot of things inspired that. I would say Underworld, the vampires from Underworld, Steve Wang's work.
Cool.
Even some of the sculpts by Simon Lee. And when I was doing that, I started reading into mythology, actually. And Rakshasa is actually from Hindu mythology, right?
Cool.
It's a man-eating creature. And you see several interpretations of it. You see it in, what was that, Supernatural, you know.
That's right.
But this is just my take on it, you know. So I would say a good mix of mythology and like looking at pop culture as it is now.
Cool. I too draw a lot from mythology in some ways. I think that there's in some ways that a lot of things that are fictitious are potentially linked to what could possibly have been, you know, exaggerations.
I mean, someone wrote about it, right?
Yeah, someone wrote about it, or someone mentioned it, and someone mentioned it in text somewhere, and it's like there's these mention of, even like the dragon, for instance, as a creature, exists in cultures all around the globe, you know, and it must have been real at some time, you know, some overlap. And I think that we were talking about that the other day, a colleague of mine behind the camera, and how there's this overlap because they found this skull that was available for download, and we 3D printed it at the office, and we were saying, hey, the narrative of even like what it is to be human is kind of lit this way. There's this mythology that is like, you know, we have these like layers or strata that are like overlapping, you know, and we take and we sort of mold what we want it to be.
Isn't it amazing that there is so much we don't know?
Yeah, I think that's the, you know, and then having that sort of jump off point, like you're saying, and there's a myth that is describing something, and then you visualize it and take it to your own sort of conclusion. I think that's pretty cool.
I think that's the joy of designing creatures, you know. It's like you take in all that information and you give the audience a version of your own. Yeah, right?
You like take it in and give it back. It's like performance, you know. You're like, oh, I take the energy from the people, and then I put it back, you know. And I think you 3D printed that. I saw that here on display. That was actually here on display. What we're speaking about was, for those of you at home, those items were on display here in a show that happened inside the Noman School of Visual Effects Gallery. Describe that experience and having that go from screen, from idea in your head to like screen inside of ZBrush, having the ability to sculpt that and make it possible, and then bring that into the real world to be able to hold it. I think we're seeing more and more of that over the course of even a day and a half. What's that feeling like for you?
It's like the best feeling for a digital artist, because being able to transcend from the digital reality to something that's physical is it's hard to say, man. It's almost like giving birth. Yeah. Because every one of those creatures, you know, they're like your baby.
Right. You have like the tangible sort of
you see it,
tacit feeling.
You see it in ZBrush, you know, you're sculpting it every day. It's a very intimate process, right? And then one day you decide to print it out. And by actually touching it, you learn so much about it more. Process.
Yeah, you're
it's
like
crazy. You're like, okay, I did this stroke in ZBrush. Yeah. I had no idea it would turn out like that. In physical. Right?
I feel the same way because I did it. I was like, oh.
Did you do a print?
Yeah, I'll show it to you. It's in the office later. Somebody said to me, I think it was Gary last evening, said to me, he said, hey, I really dig the way you did those. And I was like, oh man, I didn't really realize, you know. And I looked at them again. I was like, oh, cool. Okay, And I was like looking at it. I was like, hey, that was a neat sort of way to work.
It's awesome, man. Like the technology is getting cheaper. You see more and more people do it. You know, I think 10 years from now, you can do a sculpt in a day and get that print in a day.
I think so, absolutely. And we're going to see more about that later on today. We're going to have a presentation with some friends and colleagues from 3D Systems and Gentle Giant. So that's coming up after you. But I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier as well. Somebody was asking the audience from, I think it was one of the Twitter feeds, using alphas and things, and you said you did a lot of stuff by hand, a lot of wrinkles by hand. I think that speaks to the sort of character of yourself as a modeler, as an artist, that you have this maturity to say, hey, we could blast this with a bunch of sort of alphas, but I'm going to manage this manually because there's more personality, perhaps? Is that how you feel about it?
Yeah, I think it's the same approach that traditional sculptors have with their own work. You know, it's like whenever you do things by hand, there's a tactile feeling to it, there's a rawness to it.
Right.
And That said, I still use alphas, don't get me wrong. You
Yeah.
know, because I'm not going to spend like 10 hours sculpting every single wrinkle.
Yeah, and it depends on where it is too. I think that using an alpha for, let's say, the back of a neck,
Right.
you know, or the back of the lower part of your skull,
Uh-huh.
you know, just as get some texture in there to sort of, you know, mess it up a
Yeah,
bit is
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
But I think in a focal region like your eyes especially,
Yeah, I
think
like to go in by
yeah,
hand.
me too.
Yeah.
I like to spend time in there and just kind of like, you
Just
know,
honing in on the
turn that
details.
symmetry off, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
and then deal with it
Yeah,
specifically.
especially when you turn off symmetry, everything just changes.
Yeah.
You feel like you are sculpting with clay, just on a computer.
There was the talk about that the other day. We were having some other artist friends here on the lot, and we were saying how sometimes it feels like so when you lay a stroke down in ZBrush that it kind of knows where to go for you. Do you ever get that sort of feeling sometimes? Where you're
I
like,
think when people say that, the reason behind it is because they've gotten so used to the program, it becomes second nature.
yeah,
So
think
I
maybe
feel like
that's
they
why.
know where it's going.
they're like it's happening that way. It's like
ZBrush doesn't do it for you, but ZBrush makes it super easy for you to
Yeah.
do it, right? And then I think some artists have gotten to the point where when it becomes second nature to do it,
I think maybe that's where I'm arriving. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
getting my brown belt.
it becomes
I
so
hope.
easy, you know? And then
Yeah.
like, you think like, wow, ZBrush just did this for me, but you know what, ZBrush helped you do it. You're doing most of the work. You know?
Yeah, still have to get in
making
there.
decisions, you know.
Right on.
ZBrush is just creating that reality for you. It's great, man.
Sweet deal. Now, one more thing. Aside from, you mentioned that you do a lot of sculpting in your spare time.
Yeah.
What other hobbies do you have other than that? You spend time obviously with your family.
What other hobbies? It's a hard one. I sculpt a lot.
Well, there you
A
have it. The
lot.
proof's in the pudding.
That's
It's just like,
my life. It's sad, but my wife can attest to this.
I don't think it's sad at all.
I spend so much time because I enjoy it. It's like a hobby, which is crazy. I do it at work. I go back home and I do it some more.
Yeah.
You know, I try to work out. You know, so there you go. Just to stay alive. Especially when you're sitting at 12 hours a day behind a computer like
Yeah, right. I can understand that. You know, we go to Subway locally, and the guy says, "Hey, Flaco," which means, "Hey, thin guy." You know, I'm like, "Yes, I'm here." Me and my computer body, right?
Yeah.
So, what can you tell us about future projects that you have maybe in mind? What do you talked briefly in there about? You were mentioning a series.
Right.
So how does that come to fruition when you say, "Hey, I'm going to do a series"? What informs that kind of process?
After the past years, I've been looking at my work, and I have very sporadic designs. All of them are creatures. That's great.
Right.
But they don't really have a certain IP or genre to them. So I'm trying to steer the future designs towards a certain IP. Maybe
Okay.
create like a bestiary of creature designs based on a certain universe.
Right.
And with that in mind, I hope to create like maybe a book, an art book. You know?
Okay.
And then I'm trying to time that along with printing these creatures out. So we're going beyond just print. We're going with something that's physical, seeing a fully painted creature design.
Right.
And the idea behind this is to just be able to own these designs myself. You
Right.
know? And then perhaps that book could even come with tutorials, stuff like that.
Sweet.
Yeah. But yeah, just trying to streamline everything so that it belongs in one.
Right, like contextualize it into one space where it's one solid body of work. They're giving me the whirly finger. That means that we're all out of time.
Isn't this one?
No, that's the awesome finger.
Right,
This
okay.
means it's time we got to move on. And I really appreciate you sitting with us on behalf of all of us here and all the people around the world. Dominic Qwek, it's a real pleasure to sit with you. And the action continues here live from the Noman School of Visual Effects for the first ever ZBrush Summit. On behalf of everybody here inside the back room, I'm going to bring it back to you, Paul. Take it away.